I thought my boyfriend's daughter hated me until she begged me not to get in the car with her dad. I really thought my boyfriend's daughter hated me. Not in the dramatic way people joke about when they talk about dating someone with kids. She wasn't mean to me. She didn't act out. She never accidentally broke my stuff or tried to get me in trouble or any of that movie type nonsense. It was quieter than that. She just looked at me like I was in the wrong place, like I had stepped into a life where I didn't belong, and she didn't know how to say it in a way I would understand. At the time, I thought she was grieving, or shy, or maybe just uncomfortable with me being around. I thought maybe I reminded her that her mom was gone. I thought maybe she didn't know what to do with the idea of another woman sleeping in her dad's room and making coffee in the kitchen and asking if she wanted waffles. I thought a lot of things. What I didn't think, because it would have sounded insane back then, was that she was trying to warn me. I'm 37. I work front desk and billing at a small urgent care outside Tacoma. My life before all this was almost aggressively normal. I had a townhouse I was still slightly mad about overpaying for, a 10-year-old CRV that smelled vaguely like old coffee no matter what I did, a Trader Joe's routine that could probably be used to track my emotional state, and a job that was mostly copays, printer issues, insurance fights, and people walking in already annoyed like I had personally made them sick. It wasn't a bad life. It just wasn't the one I thought I'd still be living at 37. I'd been single long enough that I'd gotten very good at using words like peaceful and independent, when what I sometimes meant was lonely. Not always. I had friends. I had coworkers I liked. I had a normal, functioning life. But I think a lot of women in their 30s will know what I mean when I say you can build a stable life and still feel the shape of what's missing in it. So when Derek showed up on Match and seemed normal, I noticed. And I mean normal in a way that felt almost suspiciously rare. Well, he was 41, worked in logistics, owned a house, had full-time custody of his daughter, and knew how to hold a conversation without trying to turn it sexual by the third message. He didn't come on too strong. He didn't do fake therapist speak. He didn't tell me I looked younger than my age, which honestly should not be noteworthy, but if you've done online dating long enough, you know it is. He asked actual questions. He listened to the answers. He remembered things I said. He seemed tired in a believable way, responsible in a believable way, like a man who had real things to do and wasn't trying to cosplay as a good person for an app. That's what got me. I wasn't looking for fireworks. I was looking for steady. For boring, honestly. I thought boring would feel safe. He told me pretty early on that his daughter's mother wasn't around. He didn't dump the whole story on me at once, which at the time I thought was fair. We were still getting to know each other. I didn't need a trauma monologue on date 2. He said they had been together for years, had Maisie, and then at some point Anna just kind of checked out. That was his phrase. Checked out. He said she left when Maisie was little. Said she moved out of state. Said after that it was inconsistent and exhausting. Sometimes she'd respond. Sometimes she wouldn't. Sometimes she'd say she wanted to get stable and come back for Maisie, and then months would go by with nothing. He also said something I remember now with a completely different feeling than I had at the time. He said he hated talking about it because people were always quick to make excuses for women who abandoned their families. At the time, I heard bitterness. Now I hear practice. I met Maisie a couple months later. She was sitting at the kitchen island coloring in one of those giant animal coloring books kids always seem to have. Blonde hair, serious little face, pink leggings, one sock halfway off. Derek introduced me like I was already partway approved. "This is Claire," he said. "I told you about her." Maisie looked up at me, said, "Hi," and went back to coloring. That was it. I left that first meeting relieved. I remember actually thinking, okay, not warm, but not hostile either. She's probably just shy. That memory bothers me now because what I read as calmness was really just caution. Derek and I dated about 8 months before I was staying at his place more than my own. Then it became what those situations always become when you're half pretending it isn't happening. A toothbrush, a drawer, a couple shirts that stayed there. An extra charger, my shampoo in his shower, then a key. Then one day I realized I hadn't slept at my own place in nearly 2 weeks. I never officially moved in some big, discussed way. It just sort of happened, and his house looked so normal. That matters to me when I tell this story because I think people imagine danger should come with some kind of visual cue. But his house looked like 100 other houses in that neighborhood. Quiet street, hydrangeas in the front, bikes in a few neighbors' driveways, packages on porches. The kind of place where you assume the biggest problem is someone forgetting to wheel their trash can back in. Inside, everything ran on Derek's rules. Shoes by the bench, coats on hooks, no snacks after 7, no TV during dinner, no talking back, no whining, no making a mess and leaving it, no going in the garage without asking, no going in the shed without asking. And though I didn't realize it at first, no talking about Anna. I found that one out by accident. A few weeks after I'd basically moved in, Derek got stuck at work and asked if I could pick Maisie up from aftercare. I said sure. She was quiet in the car, but not upset. We stopped at Target because I needed coffee pods and toilet paper, and while we were there, she picked up a little pack of butterfly hair clips. I smiled and said, "Those are cute. I bet your mom used to get you stuff like that." She froze. And I don't mean she got sad. I mean she actually went still. Then she very carefully put the clips back and said, "Mom left." That was all. Flat voice. No tears. Just a sentence that sounded practiced. That night I mentioned it to Derek because I figured I probably should. Well, he was at the kitchen counter opening mail. He barely looked up. "I told you," he said. "She left. I don't want Maisie getting confused by people talking like her mother is coming back." "I wasn't saying that," I said. "I just made a comment." "Then don't bring her up." That was the whole conversation. He didn't yell. He didn't slam anything. He didn't call me names, which honestly made it harder to categorize. It was just that total, controlled shutting down of a subject. Like I had reached for a cabinet and found out it was welded shut. I told myself he was being protective. That became a habit with me. I kept seeing things I didn't like and giving them smaller names. Protective, strict, stressed, tired, structured, particular. You can stay in a bad situation for a long time when every individual thing still has a possible normal explanation. The first pattern that really got under my skin was the car. At first I thought Maisie got car sick. Then I wondered if she had anxiety about transitions. Then I thought maybe she just didn't like errands with her dad because he turned everything into a mission. But it wasn't really the car. It was him asking her to get in it. The first time it really landed with me was one Saturday morning. Derek wanted to go to Lowe's for yard stuff. Maisie was on the floor building something out of magnetic tiles. "Shoes," he said. "You're coming with me." Her whole body changed. That sounds dramatic, but it's the only honest way to say it. It was immediate. She got tight all over. "Can I stay here?" she asked. "No." "Please?" I said, "Get your shoes." Then she looked at me. And I still remember that look because it wasn't a normal kid look. It wasn't, "Save me from this boring errand." It was more like she was checking whether I understood something that I very obviously did not understand. So I stepped in anyway. "She can stay here with me if you want," I said. "I'm home." He looked at me for a second, just long enough to make me unsure of myself. Then he shrugged. "Fine." He left. She stayed. But what stuck with me wasn't even that she wanted to stay with me. It was how long it took her to calm down after he left. She sat in basically the same spot for 15 minutes, like she was waiting for the front door to open again. After that, I started noticing it more. If I drove her somewhere, she was fine. If we stopped for hot chocolate after school, fine. If Derek said something specific like grocery store, dentist, school pickup, she would tense up a little, but she could handle it. But if he said, "Come on, let's take a drive," or "We need to talk in the car," It was different. She would go pale. She would grab onto furniture. One time, she held onto the sleeve of my sweater so hard she stretched the cuff out. Another time, she started crying before he even had his keys in his hand. And every single time, he got annoyed too fast. Enough. Stop. You know better. At the time, I filed that under bad parenting, not danger. And I know how that sounds now. I know it sounds obvious in hindsight, but Derek did not behave like a guy out of a Lifetime movie. He behaved like a man who had convinced himself that control was the same thing as order. He packed her lunches. Oh, he remembered library day. He paid the bills on time. He mowed the lawn before it got bad. He remembered which applesauce pouches she liked and what size shoes she wore. He could also make a room go cold with one change in his tone. That combination is confusing. It definitely confused me. The house felt different when he wasn't there. That was another thing I noticed early and explained away for too long. When Derek was home, Maisie got smaller, quieter, more careful, like she was trying to be as easy to manage as possible. When he wasn't there, she loosened up. Not in some movie way where suddenly she was loud and carefree. It was subtler than that. But I could see more of her. She liked banana muffins, but only if the tops were a little overdone. She hated peas with real commitment. She loved Bluey, horses, and those tiny squishy mochi toys that somehow pick up lint from across the room. She also started giving me little pieces of information when Derek wasn't around. Daddy doesn't like when I hum. Don't tell him I had 2 popsicles. I'm not supposed to go in the shed. That kind of thing, small things. But when you put enough small things next to each other, they stop feeling small. One afternoon, we were out on the back patio. I was clipping dead flowers off some planters, and she was drawing with sidewalk chalk. Out of nowhere, she said, "Daddy says I'm not supposed to talk about before." I tried to sound casual. "Before what?" She shrugged. "Just before." I didn't push. Maybe I should have, but by then I had already learned that if she thought she'd said too much, she shut down hard. So I just said, "You can tell me things if you want." She colored over the same chalk flower until it was just a thick pink smear and said, "Not if he's here." That sat in me all day. A few days later, I picked her up from school and took her for frozen yogurt because I'd had a rough shift and wanted sugar. She dripped some down the front of her shirt and started wiping at it way too fast, way too scared. "It's okay," I said. "It's just yogurt." She nodded and without looking at me said, "Mom made him mad when she spilled stuff." I felt this cold little drop in my stomach. "Your mom?" No answer. Nothing. She shut down so completely it was like watching a door close. That night I brought up therapy. I thought if I framed it around anxiety, maybe he would listen. He didn't. "She doesn't need therapy," he said. "She needs consistency." Those aren't mutually exclusive. He closed the fridge harder than he needed to and turned toward me. "Claire," he said, "don't open doors in this house you don't know how to close." That line stayed with me. Not because it was dramatic. Because it wasn't. It was controlled, almost quiet, and somehow that made it worse. It was the first time I had the clear feeling that I was living inside a system I did not understand, and that system had rules I was not supposed to test. And still I stayed. I want to be honest about that part because I think people like clean stories. They like one obvious moment where a reasonable person would leave. But that's not how it felt living there. It felt like 20 smaller moments, each one uncomfortable but still explainable if I wanted to keep my life steady. And I did want to keep my life steady. The moment that finally broke that pattern happened in the laundry room. Derek had mentioned that Saturday we might all take a drive to look at some used patio furniture on Facebook Marketplace. Maisie was at the table with Play-Doh, and the second he said it, her hand stopped moving. Later, while he was in the shower, she came into the laundry room where I was folding towels. She stood in the doorway for a second, like she was trying to decide whether saying what she came to say was worth whatever might happen if someone heard. Then she said very quietly, "If he says you need to talk in the car, don't go." I turned around so fast I almost dropped a towel. What? She swallowed hard. If he says you need to talk in the car, she repeated, barely above a whisper, don't go. I crouched down a little so I was closer to her level. Why? She looked terrified. Not dramatic. Child terrified. Real terrified. Because he said that to my mom. The shower was still running upstairs. The dryer was going beside me. I remember hearing both of those things and my own heartbeat at the same time. I kept my voice as even as I could. What happened? He'd say they needed quiet, she whispered. He'd say they needed to talk. And then she came back sad. That was the word she used. Sad, and which somehow made it worse. Then she wrapped her arms around herself and said, sometimes she had blue marks. I knew what she meant. I hated that I knew what she meant. I asked, where? She touched her upper arm, then the side of her face. Sometimes she cried in the bathroom. Every alarm in my body was going off by then, but I was also trying not to scare her more. So I asked the only question that mattered. What happened the last time? Her eyes filled up. She didn't come back. I asked her why she thought her mom hadn't just left after that. And then she said the sentence that changed everything. Because Grandma kept looking for her. I had not known there was an active grandmother in the story at all. I knew Derek didn't like talking about Anna's family. I knew he described them as dramatic and unstable and always wanting someone to blame. I did not know one of them had actually been searching for her. Your grandma came here? I asked. Maisie nodded. She asked if Mom came back. Daddy made her leave. What did he tell her? He said he didn't know where Mom was. Then the shower upstairs stopped, and Maisie went silent so fast it was like something inside her slammed shut. That night I barely slept. I lay next to Derek staring at the ceiling and feeling more awake by the minute. But I also did not run straight to the police the next morning, and I'm saying that because I want to tell this honestly. At that point, all I had was a frightened little girl's memory, my own growing dread, and a man who was extremely good at taking ugly things and wrapping them in normal language. I needed something solid. I found it by accident. That Sunday, Derek was out dealing with a work issue, and I decided to clean up the backyard because I needed something to do besides sit there thinking. The patio looked rough. The planters were overgrown. I needed gloves and pruning shears. So I went into the shed. I want to be very clear here. I was not searching for evidence. I was looking for gardening gloves. The shed was cluttered in a completely ordinary way. Bags of soil, old paint cans, Christmas lights, extension cords, a plastic tote full of random hardware nobody had organized in years. I moved one bin to reach behind it, and that's when I saw the phone. Old smartphone? Lavender case faded from use. It was tucked behind a tote and a spool of cord. Not lost, not out in the open. Hidden. I picked it up and hit the power button. Nothing. There was an old charger plugged into a strip on the wall, so I plugged the phone in. About a minute later, the screen lit up. Lock screen photo, Anna holding a younger Maisie. And that was the moment the last innocent explanation died. Because if a woman had really left to start over, there was no normal reason for her phone to be hidden in a shed on her ex's property. I took a picture of the lock screen with my own phone, unplugged it, slipped it into my tote bag, and stood there trying to keep myself from spiraling. Then I did the smartest thing I think I did in that entire situation. I took it to her mother first, not the police, her mother. It took some digging, but I found Anna's full name through an old school fundraiser page, then found Elena Morales through one of those directory sites that feels creepy right up until you desperately need it. When she answered, I said, "You don't know me. My name is Claire. I live with Derek and Maisie, and I found something I think belonged to Anna." There was a pause. Then she asked, "Is she alive?" I still think about that question. Not who are you? Not what did you find? Not how is Maisie? Just, is she alive? We met in the parking lot of a Safeway because I wanted it to happen somewhere public. Maisie stayed buckled in my car with headphones on and her tablet. Elena came alone. She was probably in her 60s. Small, tired looking. Not frail, just worn down in a way grief can do to people. The second she saw the phone, she covered her mouth and started crying. She would never leave without this, she said. Then she asked where I found it. When I told her it had been hidden in the shed, she closed her eyes and nodded once. Like some private fear she had been trying not to say out loud had just turned solid. Elena told me that after Anna supposedly left, she got occasional texts. At first, every few days, then less often. Just enough to keep the whole thing in that awful gray area where something feels wrong but not provably wrong. The messages were always short, distant, irritated, not obviously fake but wrong somehow. I'm okay. I need space. Stop pushing. I'll come for Maisie when I'm stable. That kind of thing. Enough for police to say it looked like an adult woman choosing distance. Elena said she had gone to the police more than once. She said they listened, but without proof of foul play or a complete stop in communication, it kept getting treated like a woman who didn't want to be found. She had even driven to Derek's house once to see Maisie. He came outside, kept the entire conversation on the lawn, and made her leave. Told her Anna had made her choice, and Elena wasn't going to confuse the child by showing up and creating drama. Elena looked at me and said, I always felt something was wrong. I just never had enough to make anyone listen. I told her what Maisie had said about the car. Elena went pale. Then she said, We're going to the police. So we did. And I want to say this carefully because I don't want this to sound like one of those fake internet stories where everyone instantly believes the right person and a whole case gets solved in one dramatic afternoon. That's not what happened. What happened was that they suddenly had a previously reported missing woman, that woman's phone hidden on the property of the man who said she had left voluntarily, a mother who had been raising concerns for years, and a current live-in witness describing a pattern that sounded much darker once it was laid next to everything else. I gave a full statement. Elena gave one too. They logged the phone, photographed it, and asked me detailed questions about the house, the shed, Derek's story, his habits, what Maisie had said, whether his version of Anna leaving had ever changed. One detective told us very clearly not to confront him and not to change our behavior if we could help it. So I went back. That was one of the worst parts. I packed a bag that night and put it in my trunk. Passport, wallet, cash, laptop, meds, charger, underwear, hoodie, work shoes, toiletries, spare car key. I remember packing it in this weirdly practical, organized way while my heart was pounding like crazy. Fold shirt, add socks, grab prescription bottle, try not to panic. It was that kind of night. The next 2 days felt wrong in my body. That's the best way I know to put it. Derek started watching things he normally wouldn't have cared about. He asked why I had cleaned up the backyard. He asked if I had moved anything in the shed. He asked why I was late from work one day. Twice I heard him ask Maisie who she had talked to after school. He wasn't openly panicking, but something in him had sharpened. Like he could feel a change in the room without knowing exactly what had caused it. Maisie felt it too. She stayed closer to me when he was home, drifted into whatever room I was in, sat near me without making it obvious. Once he walked into the kitchen too fast and she flinched so hard I had to look away because I knew my face was about to give me away. Then the detective called me back. They had gotten into the phone. Even without the SIM card, there was still data on it. Photos, timestamps, location information attached to some of the images. Enough to start placing Anna's real timeline next to Derek's version of events. And his version was not holding up. That mattered, because Derek had gotten away with the story for so long by telling it like a tired, patient man dealing with a flaky ex. Calmly, repeatedly, in a way that made other people feel rude if they kept asking questions. But once investigators started making him go through it carefully, there were differences. Dates shifted. The last day he claimed to have seen Anna shifted. The timing of when she supposedly left shifted. The details of their last conversation shifted. Little things if you hear them casually. Not little when the story is about a missing woman. Then the phone data hurt him even more. I'm not going into every evidentiary detail because I'm not trying to turn this into some kind of true crime recap. But the short version is that the metadata from photos on Anna's phone and the timeline inside the device did not support the story Derek had been telling. It contradicted it. Badly enough that the police stopped treating this like old family drama and started moving quickly. That was why they came to the house. Not because I told a scary story. Not because one little girl was afraid of car rides. Because his explanations were changing and they now had actual digital evidence cutting against what he had been saying. 2 mornings later, there was a hard knock at the front door. Not the doorbell. A knock. Derek looked at me, then toward the door, and in that split second before he opened it, I saw something on his face I had never seen before. Recognition. He knew this wasn't random. He knew something had shifted. There were 2 officers outside and the detective I had already met. They told him they needed him to come with them for questioning. He tried calm confusion first, then offended confusion, then legal language. Then he started asking what this was about, whether he needed a lawyer, whether this was because of Elena, why they were at his house. He was controlled. He was careful. Even then. But they weren't there to debate on his porch. They were there because the story he had spent years keeping intact had started to come apart. They took him with them that morning. And while their attention was on him, I did exactly what I had already decided I would do the second an opening appeared. I left. I didn't make a scene. I didn't cry. I didn't stand in the hallway taking one last look around like it was a movie. I grabbed my purse, my keys, and the bag that was already in my trunk. And I walked out of that house. Not because I was brave, because I knew if I gave myself another minute, I might do what I had been doing for months, which was doubt myself. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe there's still an explanation. Maybe I should wait. I couldn't afford one more round of that. So I left. I did not take Maisie with me. That wouldn't have been legal, and it wouldn't have helped. She was handled separately, and Elena had already made it clear she was ready to take her if she was allowed. I drove straight to my friend Dana's apartment and sat in her parking lot shaking so hard I couldn't get my seatbelt off for almost a full minute. After that, the real search happened. The house, the yard, the timeline, the old digital trail, the messages Elena had gotten over the years. I'm leaving out the ugliest details on purpose. Not because they don't matter, but because I'm not sharing this to turn somebody else's worst pain into content. I'm sharing it because I still think about how easy it was to mistake warning signs for personality quirks, and how much a scared child can be trying to say without saying it in a way adults recognize. What matters is that once the phone cracked the story open, the rest of the lies stopped holding. The old messages were no longer enough to make Anna look like a flaky mother who walked away. His timeline shifted too much. Too many things only made sense if Anna had never really gotten the chance to leave at all. I gave more statements. Elena gave more statements. Maisie was interviewed by people trained to talk to children without making them carry even more fear than they already do. Eventually, Derek was charged. Later, he was convicted. Later, he went to prison. That whole part was slower and messier than people imagine. It wasn't cathartic. It wasn't cinematic. It was hearings and paperwork and continuances and waiting rooms and legal language and the same awful facts being repeated until they sounded almost clean, which is its own kind of horrible. I was not some hero. I was a witness. A late one. A woman who moved into a house and mistook fear for shyness, silence for dislike, and control for stability. Maisie ended up with Elena, which was absolutely the right outcome. And Elena deserves more credit than she probably gives herself. She had been trying to get someone to listen for years. She had not been able to save her daughter, and I know that grief will probably never leave her. But she did get her granddaughter out, and I think that matters. I saw Maisie again a few months later. Elena invited me over because Maisie wanted to show me a library book about horses. When I got there, they were about to leave for an appointment. Maisie was already buckled into the back seat with a little snack cup in her lap, and for the first time since I had known her, she looked like a normal kid in a car. That sounds like such a tiny thing, but it wasn't. She wasn't stiff. She wasn't bracing. She wasn't scanning the adult in the front seat like her safety depended on guessing his mood correctly. She just looked bored, buckled in, holding crackers. A regular kid. That image has stayed with me more than almost anything else. For a while, I thought the thing that would haunt me most was how badly I misread Derek. And yes, that still gets to me. There are moments I replay and think, how did you not hear that? Why did you need so much proof before you trusted your own discomfort? Why did you keep choosing smaller explanations just because they were easier to live with? I still don't love my answers to those questions. But if I'm honest, the thing that stays with me most is Maisie. That little girl spent years being treated like she was difficult, clingy, oversensitive, when really she was the only person in that house who never fully bought the lie. She knew something was wrong long before I did. She just didn't have the words. And I think about that all the time now, not just because of her, but because of how often adults dismiss children when they can't tell a story in a neat, linear way. Kids almost never do. They tell you sideways. They tell you in pieces. They tell you by freezing up over a sentence, by crying over a car ride, by grabbing your sleeve, by saying one weird thing and then going quiet. I thought she was cold. I thought she didn't want me there. I thought maybe I was the uncomfortable part of her life. The truth was that she was trying, with the tiny tools a 6-year-old had, to keep me from becoming the next woman who got into a car with her dad because he said they needed to talk. For a long time, I thought I was the adult in that house and she was the child. The truth is, she understood the danger before I did. I wasn't the one who figured it out. I was just the first woman who listened in time.